This is a general video showing teachers how they can prepare their students for the SSAT test. And basically what this video goes over is the basics of the test, some of the different needs that students have when they take the test, and some strategies that teachers can use. And as this is an introduction, there are more videos that give a little bit more information on specific teaching techniques and different resources that can be used by teachers. So the overview of this session, which was originally an in-person teacher training session, was first some goal setting, then an overview of the SSAT, the different SSAT sections, which comprise writing sample, the verbal section, and reading comprehension sections. You'll notice with the part 2 that I didn't include any math sections, and that is handled in another video. In part 3, I go over some general test taking strategies, some sort of overall strategies for the students, and then I finish with a wrap-up. The best way to view this video actually is to go through it section by section and to pause it, and hopefully if you're in a collaborative group you can sit and brainstorm some ideas for how the strategies presented here will work in your specific setting. If you're watching this video alone, I'd recommend that you stop and do a bit of brainstorming on your own, or at least take some notes. So throughout the video, I'll be telling you where to sort of stop and think about ways that you can make use of this information for your students. So we'll get started. Three questions often come up about the SSAT, and the first one has to do with what are the main components of the SSAT. The second question is, how do the main components differ between the different levels of the test? And I'll explain what the levels of the test are in just a minute, and they have to do with student age. And then, of course, finally, what can a teacher do to help prepare the students? Generally, in a live situation, this is a time where teachers have thought about what they wanted to get out of the presentation. And these are typical kinds of questions. So this is the starting point. So the SSAT test is a test that it's administered to basically elementary age students who want to attend, or whose parents generally want them to attend, a private school or an independent school. Many of these students or test takers are second or third or fourth language learners, and there are some serious implications for how that works with the test. Because the test itself is not intended to test second language ability. What it's really intended for is to give schools an idea of where students are at. And it doesn't take second language acquisition into account. So much of this video will be aimed at second language learners, because these tend to be the students who are most often taking the SSAT test. Now, English proficiency on this test is really key in order for students to kind of reach the goals that they would like to achieve out of this test. Sometimes students or parents have asked, is there a way to beat or game the test? And there really isn't. There's no substitute for students having a very high level of English and really a very good vocabulary. I'll talk a little bit later on about students who I know who have done well on this test, but basically it has to do with overall literacy. I'm going to go over some strategies which work for ELL students generally, and because I think the more you can do to help students improve their English, the better they will do in this test. Now, of course, there are certain test preparation techniques very specific to this test, and I will be spending some time going over those as well. So this is just a really brief sort of introduction on ideas about language acquisition. And there, of course, are many different schools of thought on how people acquire first and second language. I'm not a linguist, and I'm not going to pretend to know everything about how this works. But I really like Krashen's idea about comprehensible input. So basically, in the 80s, Krashen came up with this idea where students should get input in the target language. So in this case, it's English, and they should get it at a level that's just slightly above where they are at. The problem with the SSAT is that students are often not just slightly below the SSAT level, they're often several levels below. So according to my interpretation, at least, of Krashen's theory, we need to build those levels. And students will learn those, according to Krashen, in sort of a natural way. But what we want to do is we want to start where the students are at, not where we want them to be. And we want to build up their language and their receptive vocabulary slowly, and we want to do it in a way that is not too difficult, because if it's not too difficult, it probably won't have the desired effect. So that's the first point. So my second point here is students need a chance to consolidate and practice. And this is just something that I think every teacher has seen, that when students actually have a chance to produce English, it's sticking. It's their vocabulary is growing, and they're remembering what they're learning. I also really think that too often teachers focus on the reading and writing aspect of language acquisition. And reading and writing is very important in the first language classroom. That is the normal Canadian classrooms. Reading and writing is really important. We want to build those skills. And speaking and listening, of course, happens. But first language native speakers of English have had lots of opportunities as they've been growing up to listen and speak with their parents or at home. And second language learners are missing or have missed all that speaking and listening input. So I think as teachers, sometimes we can't assume that students are getting speaking and listening input outside of our classes. So we need to provide that. There was once quite a worry about the idea of teacher talking time, where teachers spent far too much time talking and students listening. And that is a problem, in that students will tune out after a while. But teacher speaking is still a form of input. And as long as students have a chance to do something with that input, in other words, maybe they're filling out an activity or taking notes or something like that, at least that speaking is getting in somehow. The other idea is that students need a variety of input types. So outside the classroom, input might be something like joining a class where English is the main medium of instruction, say an art class or scouts or swimming lessons or something like that. So sometimes parents will ask, what is the best way to improve my child's English? And obviously, just more and more English input is important. So if students can schedule that in a way where they're getting English input, that's really helpful. There's a typo here. Let me just correct this.